Yeah,
Good.
that's working. Thanks, Gary.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk with this group again. I did the same slot last year in slightly different circumstances, but with the same title. And it's a chance for us to look at the dynamics of change from both the perspective of everything we've been talking about today on the digital agenda, but obviously we can't not consider the challenging circumstances that we are facing with the COVID-19 outbreak. And as a behavioral scientist now, looking at through my past as an engineer and a business leader, this is just a fascinating time that I'd like to explore with you. I showed this slide last year towards the end of my presentation, and it was really challenging us as a UK water sector that we weren't really moving fast enough to meet the combined challenges in digital or everything else that actually Alison showed on her slide earlier. The water sector needs to move faster to close that gap. But of course, it won't be lost on you that a number of things have happened over the past few months. And these graphs tell a real story from the rise in cases of the outbreak outside China to the inversely patterned dip in the FTSE 100 and all other financial indices around the world. And then look at the winners and losers here with the share prices of British Airways effectively going through the floor, but the companies like Zoom that are positioned right by luck or by judgment going in the other direction. So we've just overlaid a whole different additional pressure on ourselves with the COVID-19 outbreak. So that is sort of overnight. I think the overnight happened pretty much 2 weeks ago for many of us as we realized that this was absolutely accelerating away from us. And we then tried to work out and scramble how we could work from home, and our capability and our ability to adapt and respond dropped significantly overnight as well. And then as we look forward, how are we going to respond if we continue to evolve at the rate we maybe were in the past? We just don't close the gap. And there's other businesses that are effectively going into free fall because of the impact that this is having on them. So the gap between where we are in our capabilities and our ability to keep up with the change that's happening in the environment is an existential threat for many businesses and many sectors and many individuals. If anybody's seen the film Apollo 13, there's a very interesting moment in it where the team collectively realized that their original mission to land on the moon had just been replaced by the mission to survive. And it's a fascinating moment. If you Google the Apollo 13, we just lost the moon, and watch that clip as the team struggled to comprehend and come to terms with the fact that the world had just changed around them in the light of the accident. And I think there's many business leaders going through that right at the moment, realizing that the world for them has turned on its axis and no longer is pointing the direction they thought it was. In the water sector, we're maybe slightly more shielded from that with a regulated process which sort of shapes a lot of the market for us, but I think we will still face significant change. So I'd like to offer just a few pieces of advice to start with around the time that we're all going through together. Firstly, and most importantly for all of us, not just leaders, is to put your own oxygen mask on first. Managing your own response to this weird change in the world is very important so that you can look after yourself, your family, and your people, your customers, your clients. So if you're not looking after yourself, managing your stress levels, your exercise, etc., then you can't help others. Very importantly for business leaders particularly, how you behave now will be remembered by your stakeholders. So we've seen a number of examples, not least Wetherspoons, who said, well, firstly, they tried to stay open, then they said they weren't paying their staff, they should just all go and work at Tesco's. That will be remembered by their customers and their staff for a long time to come. And clearly there's many companies doing the exact opposite, managing this in an exemplary way with their people, with their customers and clients. I would really advocate, when you're thinking about the big things associated with this for your family and your businesses and yourselves, is to take some time and slow down, because the change is happening so fast. Any assumptions you make today will be proved wrong tomorrow. So slowing down and putting some thought processes around big decisions is very important at this time, I would argue. So if we come back to the graph, our challenge is to get back onto a green curve. And how do we do that? Because we need to close this gap for the survival of individual businesses and the effectiveness of the sector as a whole. So to close the gap, it's really a Darwinian response to this. We have to adapt. And adapt means changing what we do and how we do it, changing our behavior. So my simple summary of everything that I'm going to talk about is keep calm, adapt, carry on, with the emphasis on the adaptation. And of course, the challenge to the water sector is that it has been relatively slow and cumbersome to adapt, collaborate, innovate, and everything Ofwat are doing at the moment, and all of us are talking about, is trying to adapt, but how do we push it faster? So if we're thinking about changing our behavior, we sort of need to think first, how do we define it? Behavior is something that a person does that can be observed, measured, and repeated. So when we clearly define behavior, we specifically describe actions. For example, Garry interrupts during meetings. And this is quite important to distinguish that from saying something like Garry is collaborative, because that is subjective. You don't know if I'm interrupting during the meeting to be helpful and collaborative or to be disruptive. So looking at specific behavior first, and then thinking about what is it that you want to change about that as you step into behavior change. And if you had to take one thing away from designing how to help people change, it is to step away from transmitting lots of information to try and change their minds, and move towards creating an environment in which people work it out for themselves. You know, many of you on the call are engineers and have led engineers, and will know that engineers tend to not do what you ask them to do. They do what they choose to do if it suits them. So I'm being a little bit facetious, but it is true that if you can create the environment that points the engineers in the right direction, points people, your family, your toddlers in the right direction, they will make the choices that you're trying to influence them to make. And it's really important to recognize that behavior is contingent on the environment. So the environment that you create dramatically influences the behavior of the people in that environment. And we've gone through a massive shift. It now looks almost quaint and a bit dangerous, the office situation on the left-hand side there, when people are dramatically close to each other, whereas we've now moved to a complete online situation. This was me participating in my first virtual pub quiz on Friday evening. But the environment comprises the physical or the virtual space you're in, plus the behavior of the leader of the others in that space, particularly the leaders. So again, more changes in the environment that will be evident to all of us. This we're all going through in a sort of live fashion together, and particularly moving from working from home, where we think it's going to be like the photo in the bottom left. It's probably not quite like that. And the other explosion that you'll have seen is in the memes and jokes and videos. And I do love this one, which is popping downstairs to feed the ducks with my kids on the bottom right there. So we're going through a massive environment change together, and that is changing how we behave. But we can consciously change the environment to influence and change people's behavior in a way that suits us. So how do we do that? Well, let me first give you an equation to think about as engineers. The probability of your success plus the probability of your failure equals 100% in any endeavor. So if you think about that a bit more, for you to be successful, it's and logic. You need to do A plus B plus C plus D exceptionally well to put a man on the moon. Whereas for the probability of failure, it's or logic. X or Y or Z will kill you and cause a fatal issue with your mission or project. And that's really important. So as you look at how you think about changes in the environment, an important thought process is, what are obstacles and barriers that are getting in the way of what you would like. So I'm going to give you an acronym, a model for 5 very powerful themes associated with driving behavioral change, STEAM. This is straight from the work of the Behavioral Insights team, which is summarized, tried to summarize in a simple way, key aspects that support effective behavior change. I'm going to run through these pretty quickly. So firstly, make it social. Social power and social influence is probably the primary driver of much of our behavior. It drives our buying patterns. It drives the fact that we want what others want. And it is fundamentally built into the design of all of the social media applications that hook our and our kids' attention much more than they should. And social challenges, social compromise, social issues are right at the heart of driving the behavioral changes we're going through right now. So increasingly you'll be socially distanced if you're not following the basic rules that are going on in our environment at the moment. So panic buying is another great example of a social pressure. Everybody else is buying, I need to buy, and you get the picture shown here. So how will you use positive, not negative, social pressure to drive your change? Let's move on to timely. Make it timely. So perfect timing is associated with making things work really well. And timing, I think, was mentioned at some point previously in terms of providing the right information to people at the right time. The big discussion about timing in the world just now has been, how do you introduce measures of social restriction to try and flatten the curve of the peak of the coronavirus outbreak? That has been very much on my mind. And actually, if you look at this, is from New Zealand. So my parents are currently stuck in New Zealand, and they've been living this live. That New Zealand's been much better than the UK in terms of making it really clear what the levels of preparedness and social distancing, etc., were going to be. And then they escalated very quickly, as you can see last week. So what's the best timing for your change? You wouldn't ask your boss for a pay rise when he's in a really bad mood. So when you're trying to influence people's behavior, what's the best timing to have the best impact? So make it easy, the E in STEAM. We often make it really, really difficult for people to do the things we'd like them to do. This links straight back to my comment about removing obstacles. The easier you can make it for people to do the things you want them to do, or the more difficult you can make it for them to do what you don't want them to do, the more successful you're going to be. So this is a great example of that. This is the Forest app. If anybody's if you want to make it easier to focus, if you download this on your smartphone, this app will help you to focus. I'll let you go and look at that for yourselves. Digital rehearsal is about making it easier to engage, and Claire talked a lot about this earlier. Stephen was very happy when I Googled digital rehearsal and this image came up first on the images from Google, which is actually, as I understand it, an MWH treatment job. He then also told me that they've now made it difficult for people not to do a digital rehearsal in certain of the teams that they operate in. They have to fill out lots of reasons as to why they're not doing it to encourage people to do it. So the key question, how will you make it easier for people to do what you want or harder for them to do what you don't want? The A in STEAM is to make it attractive, which means make it novel, interesting, shocking, anything that grabs attention. If you would please, if you've got a smartphone beside you, quickly open the QR code reader and point it at this QR code on the screen. So just while you do that, I'll explain that this is a company that I was speaking to a partner at PRP who are architects who are like us, all now working from home, still seeking to influence and sell to their clients. We have major bid processes coming up in which they are now using QR codes so the client can open that up. And hopefully for those of you who've managed to get it, you're straight into a digital model of the project that they're seeking to bid and sell to the client. So I'll move on quickly. I can show that again later on if you didn't get a chance to capture that code, but it'll take you into a live digital model straight from your smartphone. The final and very powerful M in STEAM is to use the right messenger. And probably the best examples of that we've seen over the last few years has been the impact of both David Attenborough and Greta Thunberg around the whole environmental agenda. That it's such a powerful message, but it also shows that you need different messengers for different audiences within the population you're trying to influence. And just to finish, you can see that this is one that actually is a very powerful one that's within the sector, using the daughter as a messenger. So who is the right messenger for the change you want? So really that is 5 key questions, and we've got an open question about how ready the UK water sector is to adapt in the changes that we face. We've got a survey open at the moment that Stephen mentioned earlier, and maybe we can share the link to that again. That is looking at our readiness for digital and related issues to COVID-19 across the UK water sector, and we'll complete that and share the results with whoever wants to see it. So I'm just going to finish with this slide, Stephen, just to reinforce, the questions that if you're asking these around the change that you're seeking to influence, then you will help nudge people in the right direction.
So thank you very much, Gary. And then I think just to put a bit of context around that, what we've seen today through the presentations is that it's really important to understand the behavioural aspects we are undergoing. We have all been forced to change and adapt in the last